another interesting area is the idea of using kind of patents for specific disorders that you might treat with psychedelics. And I think Compass also filed a patent for treating anorexia, possibly with psilocybin. And so is that something that's on the table, like specific treatment modalities for specific disorders?
Yeah, and that's, an area where maybe they can combine enough sort of limitations. So when I keep saying limitations, like these are the elements in the claims that are, kind of individually looked at to see if it's novel or non-obvious oftentimes. And if the things that are in a claim are found to be either not novel or obvious, the patent applicant can add more limitations to it. So, if you have a claim that's just giving somebody psilocybin for therapy in a room with soft furniture, if that's found to be obvious, then you can add something else to it. So, then you can add, whatever else you want. There's a water fountain in the corner or some sort of spa music. But so, yeah, I mean, this is another, I think, tack it seems that they're taking from these applications. And they have, anorexia is a good example, but they've filed, I think, more indications, than I even knew existed. I mean, there's like pyromania in there and, skin picking disorder and a whole number of indications that, I would imagine they're not going to try to take through FDA approval as approved clinical indications, but maybe they would think somebody's going to be using off-label. Anorexia, that's a good example to use because their patent application was filed in, can't remember the exact date, but after their application was filed and before it was published, there were a number of clinical research studies started, one at Imperial College London and one at Johns Hopkins, both studying psilocybin for treatment of anorexia. And subsequent to those two, Compass is also, I think, affiliated with one at UC San Diego. So, Compass was sort of third to start a clinical trial on psilocybin for anorexia, but they have this patent that was filed before all of them. So potentially, like if they had claims granted on that, like what would that mean for the, this other research that's going on? And people oftentimes think that research, should be allowed to be pursued even if there's like a patent granted. And that actually used to be the case in the US, and it is still the case in some countries, but in the US now, actually like research can infringe someone's patent unless it's being done specifically for FDA approval. So research that's, just done as part of a, kind of unaffiliated research program that's not specifically for FDA approval would potentially, be at risk of being, shut down or, I don't know what other kind of like agreement would have to be struck with them to pay a royalty or something. It's also a good example too of the nature of prior art and how difficult sometimes it is to get prior art to a claim. In the 50s, there was a woman who was given psilocybin for anorexia. And this was written up in someone's dissertation in France. And there's a woman, Erica Rex, who like wrote about this in a newsletter and kind of brought it to light. But she talked about the fact that this was very difficult for her to get her hands on, and she actually lives now in France and speaks French and had heard about it, but like spent quite a long time trying to track down this dissertation, which is it's really right on point. It's psilocybin for anorexia, so this in theory should render this claim not novel. But like, how would a patent examiner in the U.S. have even been made aware of this, and would they have taken the time to try to find it? And so things that are prior art and properly so are often not in front of a patent examiner, and that's one of the reasons why claims that are more broad than they should be sometimes get granted.
Right. And another area which maybe on the face of it seems a bit less fraught with these kinds of issues is the development of new molecules, because I know there are people trying to tweak existing kind of psychedelic compounds to have different properties, whether it's seeing things about attempting to make psychedelics without the trip component, without the kind of the actual kind of psychoactive effects, which I personally don't think is a wise idea, but that's a different conversation. But is this also an area where people are successfully filing patents for new molecules?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an area that's less fraught with these ethical issues. I mean, Rick Doblin, for instance, has come out and said that this is an area like him and MAPS support as something that's, appropriate to file patents on. And I think that's probably seen by many as an area where, patents are more deserved. And certainly, that's an area kind of like how we started saying the sort of bargain of a patent is meant to encourage this sort of research. I mean, that's, with a truly new chemical entity, without patent protection, that kind of research may never get done. So that's, there are obviously some counterexamples. Alex Shulgin was not like, although he did file patents on some of his claims, so it's not entirely the case, but, there's not a lot of kind of underground chemists who are spending time, kind of, their own time, particularly, working with new chemicals, and then certainly not taking them all the way through the FDA approval process. So, there's like certainly bigger conversations to be had about whether the FDA approval process is necessary or is even really appropriate. And, there's an alternate universe where people could be coming up with new psychedelic compounds, not getting them protected by patent, and, still find a way to have them tested and eventually potentially even produced. But that's, not the world we live in at the moment. So at least for the medicalization route, like, this is an area where I think patents have sort of an appropriate place to play.
Right. And another area seems to be combinations of compounds. Like, so, this is another area where it seems that kind of it's not necessarily a new step forward, in that you have, I think there's a patent filed for a combination of MDMA and LSD, which I think is known as candy flipping and kind of underground.
Mm-hmm.
And also cannabinoids and psilocybin, which is, again, smoking cannabis and taking mushrooms is not, hippies have been known to do both. I would say, this is not something that's like some new, leap forward. But I think both of those has been filed as patents, right?
Yeah, they have. And I mean, I think, this is an example of oftentimes people just looking for different ways to, find something that's protectable around compounds that are already in the prior art. So the Mdma Lsd patent, I haven't, seen it, so I don't know if there's something specific in the way that they're given or the way that they're, formulated or dosed. And the same, I guess, could be said. I don't know the non-public information about the cannabis psilocybin one, but certainly those two things have been done together. But the way that they're being dosed or the way that they're formulated, potentially there's some patentable invention there. But yeah, I mean, this actually is a problem that the pharmaceutical space has dealt with, and actually where I kind of got the start of my career was working with big pharmaceutical companies. As drugs were coming off patent, they were concerned about losing their monopoly on them and trying to figure out ways to sort of extend that period of protection. Oftentimes when you're making such good revenues from the sale of a drug, you don't want generics to be able to launch very quickly. So there's a problem that pharmaceutical companies have faced, which is, okay, we have this compound. The compound itself has been patented, with these very strong sort of composition of matter claims. What can we do to extend that patent protection? So there are a number of different techniques that pharmaceutical companies take, which is doing things like what Compass did, the solid form, the polymorph, formulations, dosing regimens, these sorts of things. And these are now often in the psychedelic space the strategy that companies are taking from the outset, because they didn't already have a patent covering the natural compound, but the natural compound itself still wasn't able to be patented. So what are these sort of secondary patents one can get on the compound?